Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel deck profile. Today we're taking a look at Harpy Ladies and the Hysteric Force skill, which is one of the more interesting new skills that we've gotten. So, this skill can be used if the only monsters with 1400 or more attack in your deck are wind attribute. Requirement none, effect, one face-up Harpy Lady Sisters or Harpy's Pet Dragon on your field gains attack equal to that monster's level times 100 until the end of this turn. Then, if there are no attack position monsters in your opponent's field, you can change one defense position monster on your opponent's field to attack position. So this skill is really good for two reasons. First off, we can boost our attack, which a lot of the time is very necessary. It gives us this kind of soft Sevens Road Magician type effect, where we can get our attack over our opponent's big monsters, which is very, very good. And we can also hit some very relevant numbers, which we'll talk about in a minute. But also, if our opponent has no attack position monsters, we can change one of their defense position monsters to attack position, which does give us a way to get to our opponent's life points, which is always going to be really, really strong. Now, there is some counterplay to this skill in that your opponent can choose to normal summon one monster that has the highest attack and then set two other monsters, at which point we cannot use our skill and we are forced to get in for the smaller amount of damage. That is some counterplay you can also use against this deck. But other than that, there isn't really a lot you can really do to counterplay against this other than just not be on the defensive. So we'll take a look at the boss monsters. The first one, the big boss of the deck, the level 7 Harpies Pet Dragon. 2000 attack, 2500 defense. Now notably, the 2500 defense does actually come up quite a lot. If we're playing against the Thunder deck, for example, without Trigger Drago, they oftentimes will struggle to get over the Harpies Pet Dragon. And that is because the Thunder skill only weakens your monster's attack, which means obviously if our card's in defense mode, it won't work against it, as well as the fact that you can't use that on a face-down monster, so setting a Harpy's Pet Dragon is actually a relatively safe play. Obviously, there are still some decks that can get around it. Another deck which can struggle to get around it is the Overlord deck, because if they use their skill, again, they can't reduce our defense because it only reduces attack, as well as they can't use it because our monster will be set on the field. And then Sevens Road Magician will need two different attributes in graveyard to actually be able to use it, which isn't too difficult, but does come up sometimes where they actually get stuck at 24 and cannot clear your set Harpy's Pet Dragon on turn 1. But this card gains attack equal to the number of face-up Harpy Ladies on the field times 300, plus the number of face-up Harpy Lady Sisters on the field times 900. So this is very, very important, because if we are able to get out two different Harpy Lady Sisters, basically we can boost our attack up by 1800. That boosts this up to 3800, which is obviously only 200 shy of the highest attack in the game, that being Drago, who has 4000. If we combine our skill with that, we can add an extra 700 because it gains 100 times its own level, and it becomes 4500 attack, which is actually insane. Harpy's Pet Dragon is going to be our kind of big game ender, and it's also kind of the muscle of the deck, as well as the fact it does get boosted by your opponent's Harpies. So in the mirror match, Harpy's Pet Dragon becomes even more valuable. The next boss monster we're going to talk about is Harpy Lady Sisters, and this is the middle piece of the Maximum. So I guess we'll talk about the Maximum a little bit now. The Maximum monster is something that will come out very, very infrequently, but when it does come out, it will feel very, very powerful. So there is a different version of this deck that you can use that does play things like Trick Pigeon and does use Monster Reincarnation and tries to focus more in on that Maximum, but I find that's very, very high roll, whereas we're trying to play a bit more of a consistent style deck, so we have opted to go for this kind of build instead. But the Maximum itself is very, very good. Using our skill, again, it can gain attack equal to its level times 100. It's a level 10, so it'll gain 1000 attack, putting it up from 34 up to 44, and then using the Harpy Lady Sisters middle piece skill, we can then boost it by a further 500, put it to 4900 that can attack 3 times on monsters, which is very, very good and can be a very, very strong game ender. It's just how often does it actually come off? Not too often. As for the actual middle piece itself, again, we can shuffle 2 wind attribute, wing beast type monsters from our graveyard into the deck. That's why we've kind of loaded up on some of them. I guess specifically, other than the actual Harpy Lady itself, the only other one we're playing is Faithbird. But that's the reason we're primarily on that, as well as the fact we can only have wind monsters in our deck that have 1400 or more attack, so it does also work quite well with that. But we can shuffle 2 back into the deck, which again can be useful for reshuffling our other Maximum pieces. Being able to put them back in the deck so we can redraw them and resummon them out can be really, really powerful, and also stops us from decking out, which also does come up. One face-up monster on your field gains 500 attack. Now, notably, this is any monster. This isn't itself. This isn't a winged beast. This isn't a Harpy Lady. This is just any monster gains 500. So we can use this to boost anything. We can boost our Faith Bird up to 2000 attack. We can boost Cybertech Alligator up to 3000 attack. If we really wanted to, we could boost Lamoon or Babysitter Goat by 500. And it does come up quite often where you want to spread out your damage to play around things like Widespread. So being able to have this being used on anything is actually very, very powerful. And then when we're in maximum mode, it burns your opponent for 500. It doesn't really matter, but occasionally it will come up where that 500 does actually let you close out the game. So it's relevant-ish. Next up, we have our Seahorse Carriers. So these are in here basically as an engine to help us get back our Lamoons, and then we can just tribute them all away to get out Harpy's Pet Dragon or occasionally multiple Harpy Lady Sisters. It's generally just in here as a consistency tool and does work quite nicely, especially when we do have some discard effects, such as Tribute to the Doomed that we're currently playing in here. Tribute to the Doomed is not strictly speaking necessary. Again, we can run any of the legends, but since we are using it, having the extra discard with Seahorse Carrier is pretty useful. Next up, we have Harpy Lady Sisters L. Now, this is a very, very important piece because this card cannot be destroyed by your opponent's trap cards, which means quite oftentimes we will be using our skill and sometimes our Harpy Lady Sisters middle piece to boost up L and therefore completely make our opponent's Widespread Ruin null and void. As long as we don't have a Harpy's Pet Dragon out at the same time as Harpy Lady Sisters L, that means Widespread Ruin will straight up not affect us because the only monster it can hit can't be destroyed by trap cards. So very, very important card, and this card has been seeing play outside of the actual Harpies themselves just because its effect is so good. Then we have probably the weakest part of the maximum here, and this is the RP. So this card's name becomes Harpy Lady Sisters, cannot be destroyed by your opponent's monster effects. So again, not being able to be destroyed by monster effects isn't too relevant in the current meta. Now, this will come up occasionally against light machines. It does come up against ancient forces, but strictly speaking, this isn't really going to matter. So it's still good though, right? Having this still works with Hysteric Force. It still boosts the power of Harpy's Pet Dragon. It still helps us maximum summon. It's still a good card to have. It's just notably weaker than the others. And next up, we have Rising Light Angel Essel. Now, you've probably noticed this card is in most of the deck breakdowns we've done recently, and that's because this card is really, really strong. So during the turn you have not special summoned a monster, send the top 2 cards of your deck to the graveyard. Then if you activate this effect during the first turn of the player going second, you can special summon 1 monster from either player's graveyard face up to your field. So obviously the best way to use this is to use it to get back a Harpy's Pet Dragon. Being able to just cheat this out for free is absolutely insane. But you can also use this to bring back your opponent's monsters, and in general, just plussing is a good thing on its own. If you can plus out a boss monster, it is really, really powerful. On top of the fact this does just mill 2 cards, which is still useful at later stages in the game. We still want to have cards in the graveyard for Talismanic Seal Array. We are on the King's Majesty, which means we are going to want Babysitter Goats in the graveyard. Because we're on the Seahorse Carriers, we want Lamoons in the graveyard. Because we're on Harpy Lady Sisters, we're going to want Wind Attribute Winged Beast monsters in the graveyard. So as you can see, we want lots and lots of cards in the graveyard. So just milling cards is generally really, really good. So even if we don't fully high roll and just get like a free win off this card, we still have some use for it, and it still just fit quite nicely into the deck. Next up, we have Cybertech Alligator, and Cybertech Alligator is really, really strong. First off, the restriction on our skill means this is the only legend monster that we can actually play. Second, it's 2500 attack with only 1 tribute, which is pretty cool. It's better than Summon Skull because it has more defense and it is a lower level. Being a lower level is very relevant in terms of Talismanic Seal Array, or occasionally it might come up against Royal Rebels, but primarily it doesn't really matter because it will go down to 1 against Tuning, which means it will almost certainly be the card that gets popped by the Heavy Metal, which does give it a plus 2500, which is probably what they want anyway, so it doesn't really work very well against that. But again, it will only go down to 1500 when faced with Talismanic Seal Array, which is relevant because that means they can't as easily clear over it. Next up, we have 3 Harpy Ladies. Again, these do boost Harpy's Pet Dragon, so that is something to take note of. Other than that, they have a 1400 butt, which again is quite high. A lot of the time, people will actually struggle to get over this. And it's a Winged Beast, which means it does work quite nicely with Harpy Lady Sisters. Then Faith Bird is again just a 1500 beater, Winged Beast. There's not really much more to say about it than that. Lamoon is in here basically again, just to be used as fodder for the Seahorse Carrier. And then Babysitter Goat is in here again to be used with King's Majesty. Now, notably, Babysitter Goat is a bit awkward. And I guess you could say the same thing about Lamoon. So these cards are kind of opposites in that we could, instead of using Lamoon, we could be using Grace Princess Kana. And at the same time, instead of using the Babysitter Goat, we could be using Descendant of Titans. Now, basically, we've kind of split the difference and gone for half and half. But if we're playing against Royal Rebels, we would much rather have Babysitter Goat, and we'd much rather have Grace Princess Kana. If we're playing against Harpy ladies, we would much rather have Lamoon, and we'd much rather have Descendant of Titans. So depending on what you think you're going to be playing against, you should tailor them specifically to deal with it. The reason we'd rather have lower attack and lower level monsters against Royal Rebels is because that plays around heavy metal. He has to pop the lowest monster and he will gain the attack of that monster. So we want these low level, low attack monsters for that. And the reason we want high attack monsters against Harpies is because they will again use the Hysteric Force skill against us and force our monsters face up into attack position. If we have a 0 attack Babysitter Goat, that is basically a free attack at our life points. Whereas if we had Descendant of Titans, that's 1,000 damage off of the damage we're taking to our life, which is pretty good and relevant. So depending on what you think you're going to be against, you should change it up depending. What I've generally found is at lower rank, you play against a ton of Harpies, so you're probably better off using higher attack monsters. And at higher rank, you tend to play against more Royal Rebels, so against them, that's when we start using the lower level, lower attack monsters. Next up, we have Tribute to the Doomed. This card, again, is really, really good. It's a little bit steep in cost, but I often find with this deck I kind of want to be discarding, so it does kind of work out a little bit. Again, being able to pop face down monsters can be really good for getting to your opponent's life points, and being able to deal with those pesky maximums can also be really, really good. But again, this card can be anything. We can use Monster Reincarnation if we want to focus more on maximum summoning. We can also use Shield and Sword if we want to get some cheeky kind of direct damage in. The main reason we're not using Shield and Sword is I don't really like it with our maximums, and a lot of the time our maximums stick around, and because they do stick around, they will have 0 attack after a Shield and Sword. But Harpy's Pet Dragon obviously loves Shield and Sword because it's got 2500 butt, so I think you can kind of play whichever one you want and it will work regardless. I just think Tribute to the Doomed is the more versatile of them. Then we have Talismanic Seal Array. This is our other kind of out to maximums, but also is just really good at everything. Again, we're going to be milling quite a lot with this deck, so we want to be putting lots of cards back. And because of this card and the Harpy Lady Sisters middle piece, we do very rarely seem to deck out. The Talismanic Seal Array being able to weaken a monster means we get a load of damage in. Perfect out to maximums, just a really fantastic card right now. And then Widespread Ruin, again, just absolutely fantastic. And King's Majesty, also really good. So the reason these two traps are so important right now is because these are the only two ways we have to really deal with the Royal Rebels. Royal Rebels can just slam down an invasion, wipe your whole board, then attack you directly. These are the only two cards in the game that can interact with that. Basically, cards that can stop attacks even when we don't have any monsters on the field. So King's Majesty and Widespread Ruin, very, very good for those reasons, as well as the fact that King's Majesty is the only card to stop a Magnum Overlord from attacking, or I suppose any maximum really. Magnum Overlord is the one that's going to try and OTK you, so we can use King's Majesty to protect our monsters as well as our life points, and then on the crackback hopefully have a Tribute to the Doomed or a Talismanic Seal Array, or be able to summon out a really big Harpy's Pet Dragon and destroy it on the crackback. So this is the deck. All in all, I'm not the biggest fan of this deck. It's not, strictly speaking, a bad deck. It's just, it feels like it's missing something to really get it going. Now, there are some other cards we could include, such as Counter Pigeons. And Counter Pigeons is a pretty good card. In the right situation, can seem really, really powerful. I just don't want to run too many spell traps, which is why we've got this kind of tight little 5 package in here. But Counter Pigeons is a pretty good trap card. When an opponent's monster declares an attack targeting your attack position wing beast type monster, the attacking monster loses attack equal to the level of the attacking monster times 100 until the end of the turn. What I've generally found with this card is it's good half of the time. Like if your opponent's attacking you with the Dragius, for example, and you've got a 2100 attack Harpy Lady Sisters, the Dragius will lose 700 attack, go down to 1800, ram into your sisters, and kill itself. But if you're playing against a maximum, a lot of the time it won't stop the attack. It will probably still kill you. Sometimes it will leave you alive on very small life points, but it oftentimes doesn't actually protect you in the way you want it to. And it can be very awkward against a lot of decks. So Thunder, for example, they can summon out Trigger Drago, which is a level 7 monster. Trigger Drago, which we'll actually bring up here. So Trigger Drago, 2500 attack, can gain 300 by its own effect, goes up to 28. That means if it attacks into Harpy Lady Sisters and we use Counter Pigeons, we can reduce its attack by 7 because it's a level 7 monster. So 28 becomes 21, and that's now a crash. But that's only true if they haven't already used their skill to either change our Harpies to defense mode or reduce their attack by 100 times their own level and then easily attack over it. So there's a lot of situations where the amount of attack reduced from Counter Pigeons is not enough to protect our monsters, and that actually I find happens more often than not. So I'm not actually the biggest fan of Counter Pigeons personally. And the other card I've seen a lot of people playing is Ghost Cyclone, which again, really, really good card. Just in testing, I kept finding that I kept being able to keep monsters on the board and therefore Ghost Cyclone wasn't live very often. So we took it out, and then we started winning a lot more. But I don't want to swear off this card. I think Ghost Cyclone is still a really, really good card in this deck, and I still would be playing it if I felt like it wasn't dead most of the time when we were using it. But this deck is good. I think that's where I'm kind of landing with it. It's good. I don't think it's top tier. I think it's very, very free-to-play friendly, and because of that, you'll see it a ton on the ladder, and that is something that's just always going to be happening. It's fun enough. I think that's my kind of takeaway. Summoning out a giant Harpies Pet Dragon is really cool. Whenever you do get to just summon out the maximum, it's really, really cool. Being able to summon out multiple level 5 monsters does also feel really good. Being able to change your opponent's defense monsters to attack and always have a way to get their life points also feels pretty good. But overall, I'm quite happy with where this deck's at. It's not my favorite deck in the meta, and I do not think it is one of the best decks in the meta, but I think it is a really solid choice, and like I said, very free-to-play friendly. So, let's find some replays, like I show I've been talking about.
くよラッシュデュエル。いいよラッシュデュエル。始めようかラッシュデュエル。ラッシュデュエル。